I'll try to do it quicker without maybe the in-depth understanding of the sources. But just what we got up till today was we mentioned the interconnection, the life connection of the land and the people. We saw how one without the other is not alive, the land without the people. We saw the curse of the desolation, barren, empty land. And also, we saw the other side of the coin. We began with the Jewish people, how they're how they're defined when they're outside the land of Israel. So we saw how the prophet in Yechezkel 37 likens the Jews in exile as in the graveyard. The lack of expression of life, the full life, the neshama that comes to unify all the Jews in the land of Israel, to make them one, to one nation, to be goy echad ba'aretz, one nation in the land. The rabbis say that in the land they're one. That we saw last week, that source. That the neshama, as it says in Yeshayahu 42, the neshama, noten neshama la'amaleh, give the neshama, the soul of life, this unifying force that comes and makes the nation into one and makes it the vehicle to express the divine content. That is noten neshama la'amaleh, to the nation upon the land of Israel. When outside the land, there's no body to receive that neshama. It's absent, it's how do you say, lacking its receptacle, its earthly vehicle to express that name of God, that divine ideal. That's why the galut is called, in chapter 36, in Yechezkel, the desecration of God's name, his ideal, cannot be revealed in this world. His name is now lacking. That's why it's called the graveyard in Yechezkel 37. The nation is not alive, not expressing that life, its inner content. A dead person, the body's there, but the neshama is not coming to expression through the actions, through his speech, through his being. The Jewish people to be a kingdom of priests and holy nation is lacking when they're outside the land. And that's why, so we'll see other sources coming up of other definitions, what is lacking on the bigger perspective to the world, to creation, this bridge that connects God to this world, or connects this world to that which is beyond. And that's what we saw last week. Just to remind you quickly that it said that when the Jews come back to the land, then God will be called one again. That God is not as if not called one. He's always one. He's beyond. But his oneness, it's revealed in this world. You see the unity, the fullness of life, totality, all connected to, all infused with this godliness, with goodness, with justice, with holiness in this world. That comes down through the vehicle. We mentioned two pieces of metal that conduct of the Jews in the land of Israel. The rabbi said it explicitly last week, just to remind you what we saw from the Zohar, that when the Jews come back to the land, then will be fulfilled the verse that God is one and his name is one. And that's the whole purpose of creation, right? That the ideal above is revealed below in our world. That Hashem echad u'shmo echad, that he is one, the absolute, and is revealed, his name is one. The expression of that oneness, that goodness, that holiness in all of life, permeates all of existence. And that is through a nation that lives all of reality, government, politics, army, industry, commerce, with the institutions, the national institutions in Eretz Yisrael of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, the kingdom, prophecy, and the Sanhedrin. That can be revealed when the Jews are in the land of Israel. When that vehicle is fractured, then what's lacking is the oneness of God. His name cannot be revealed. His oneness is not revealed. So the rabbi said it very quickly and very, how do you say, unequivocally, that when the Jews come back from the exile and return to Eretz Yisrael, and that day will be fulfilled the verse that we say every day, right, at the end of Aleinu L'Shabeach, 3 times a day, the verse in Zechariah chapter 14, Bayomahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad, that he will be one, his name is one. That's what's at stake here. It's not some, I don't know, Zionist propaganda, it's nice to be a nation again, nationalism, whatever, politics. The oneness of God, the expression of that goodness, the connection of all of reality, all of existence, all of mankind to this source of one, to the source of all life, which ultimately not just unifies the nation of Israel, but unifies therefore all of mankind. When we're not lacking, when the nation is lacking, when Am Yisrael is not in its place, like the rabbis liken it to the heart of the body, the Kuzari and others based on the Zohar, that the nation of Israel is like the heart of the nations. It comes to give life and meaning and direction and important significance to all the branches, all the limbs of the body, all of the nations of the world. When Am Yisrael is not, when his heart is not functioning, it's like the conductor that conducts all the different instruments, shows them out to bring their contribution. Each one adds to the beautiful harmony of the symphony orchestra. And each one is needed. The fullness of the music, the richness is by the multiplicity, the variety of the different instruments. Not that they all should be Am Yisrael, they all should be Jewish, whatever. No, one drum. Everyone is a drum. Everyone is a violin. No, all the multiplicity, but all connected, directed by this conductor that unifies them, and brings this music. And what music? The music of God to the world. It's hard to describe. Of not just positive. In other words, living happily and no disease and no wars and no suffering and no jealousy. But more than that, even it brings a divine content to the world. That is when Am Yisrael is functioning and all the limbs feel as one. When that conductor is lacking, when the Am Yisrael wasn't in the land of Israel, that's what even the nations call the Dark Ages, right? The feudal system, caste system, the science didn't develop. It was like the Dark Ages. We're coming back. We'll see the sources that talk about the connection of our coming back returns life. This God's blessing starts to flow to the world again. But on the national, on the universal perspective, the unity of mankind. When the heart is now functioning, all the limbs feel as one. What it says in Yeshayahu chapter 2, written on the walls of the UN, right? That they'll beat their swords into plowshares. So it's easy to copy that verse of our prophet, that man, no war, no more warfare, man will beat their swords into plowshares. Easy to write on the walls, but how do you write that in the hearts of man, on the walls of man's hearts, that it becomes a reality? It's a philosophy. You shouldn't kill, you shouldn't hurt other people, or lacking of war because you're afraid of a deterrent. If you attack, they'll get you back with even bigger, greater ICBMs, whatever. But no, what it'll be when the nation of Israel is functioning properly, this divine energy flowing to the world, and there's a unity of all of mankind. It doesn't dawn on you to hurt other people. How can you hurt someone else? How can you attack someone else? He's part of you. The world is one under God, the source of one. We say again in Elenu Shabbat, "L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai," to fix the world under God's kingdom, to plug in this world to the source above, and then unbelievable, not only unity and harmony, but godliness beyond this world is infused into this world. And that is what's made available. What the Rabbi said, we mentioned last week, just quickly to remind you, that when the Jews come back to Israel, then God will be one and his name will be one. And the whole unity of God, then he'll be called one. And when is that? When the Jews are below, in this world, in the land of Israel. Goy echad ba'aretz, right? We mentioned this just to remind you what we saw last week. That then there's this flow of godliness, of oneness, when the Jews are in the land, because it says, you're a one, like we say in Mincha and Shabbat, you are one, and your name is one. How is that revealed? Through the nation that is one. And where are they one? The Rabbi said last week, in the land of Israel. Outside of which they're not called one. There's a broken, fractured vehicle, a vessel, like we said, this energy, this giant hero, courageous person. But in the hospital, he broken up on different limbs, the heart and lung machine, the kidney machine. He can't express that great personality, that great energy that he has.
Clean into different shards. A clean into different shards, fragments.
Okay. That's what that's what so God's name, the oneness of the world is at stake here. It's not some private national issue of Jews being able to be in the land or together or easier to keep kosher, to speak Hebrew and Eretz Yisrael. Those are all advantages, but the main thing, the gift, the universal gift, like it says to the fathers, all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. You'll be the source of blessing, this connection of the world plugging in to the source above. But now I wanted to continue. We saw, you can call this, so to speak, metaphysical, how this is the conduit for God's energy, God's light, God's blessing to come to the world through the vehicle of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. But in Torah, as you know, there's the source, the spiritual source of the neshama, the spiritual source, the spiritual realm, and the body, and the physical manifestation of that. So too in the Torah, there's the soul of Torah, like the Kabbalah, the deeper wisdom talks about the bigger ideals and God's concepts and ideals that wishes to bestow upon the world. And the halakha explains how, and it shows how those ideals are manifested in reality, in the day-to-day, three-dimensional world that we live in, what to do and how to do. Behind the how to do, or the what to do this and do that, the do's and don'ts, there's a world of ideals, of wisdom, of content, of energy that is revealed to that. So here we saw so far that in Eretz Yisrael enables this influx of the divine, which I said, my sentence right, that the Jewish people come from beyond this world into this world to raise this world beyond this world, not just to have local human goodness and morality. That's still within the framework of this world, but our goal is to bring godliness, so to speak, to connect the world to something much greater than the limits of what we have today. But how is that expressed in halakha? Where do we see this expression, in other words, how the nation is defined by the Jews in Eretz Yisrael? In other words, to put it as a question, to say, how is halachically defined, what defines the Jewish people? All the Jews in the world all the Jews in Israel, all the Jews in Yerushalayim. What is the halachic definition? So here we'll see. Oh, you have the sheets from last week. Those who have them, that's the same sheet. We didn't finish yet. Those who don't have. Anyone else? You were here last week. No?
You mean 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago. We had a tiul last week. So, anyway, David, you have?
No, I'm missing.
So, okay. Again, like I said, we'll do it quickly because we have so much to do. The bottom source here on the sheet, this is from the Talmud Bavli, Tractate of Horayot. It's interesting. It's a tractate that talks about mistaken legislation by the court, by the Sanhedrin, by the rabbis. Rabbis can err. There can be mistakes. Even the Sanhedrin, these great rabbis. And there's a whole tractate that discusses when they make mistakes, what to do, how to do. So here is a certain law. Can I borrow your Tanakh for a second? Sorry, you're in the middle of something else, but sorry. I can use the Chumash if you prefer. You want to use it? In Vayikra chapter 4, there is a sacrifice called Par Helem Davar. Chapter 4, verse 13. It says, I'll read it in English. It says, if the whole congregation of Israel sinned through ignorance, and the thing be hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done something against one of the commandments of the Lord, and they have incurred guilt, the congregation shall offer a young bullock for the sin. This is called, it says, Yishgu v'ne'elam davar, if the thing is hidden from the courts made a mistake. There's not just individuals made a mistake and did something forbidden. Then they bring a sacrifice, right? If anyone does a sin accidentally, there's this korban chatat. Each one brings a sin offering. But what happens if the court made this certain legislation? You're allowed to do X activity on Shabbat. And they find out, oh, we made a mistake. But meanwhile, everyone did it, thinking it was legal. The rabbi said it was okay. So it says if it's hidden from the nation, in other words, they made a mistake that was the wrong decision, legislation, but they went accordingly and they were guilty. And now v'noda, now it becomes known that what they did, now they bring one sacrifice. The court, the rabbis, the nation brings one sacrifice called Par Helem Davar. So the question is, that's if the nation makes this sin. The question is, what defines the nation? Because the law is, as we'll see, depends on the majority of the Jewish people. Not everyone does this sin. Again, this mistaken, right? Based on the legislation, the rabbi said it's okay. And they did so, and it turns out that it was a mistake. That's what's called, a shogeg, and non-premeditatory. They didn't do it purposely to do a sin. They thought they were doing something allowable, that was permissible. But it turns out that it was wrong. So you see the Gemara here, it says, read the English, Rabbi Asi says, in the case of an erroneous ruling of a court, the majority of the inhabitants of the land of Israel are to be taken into account. So you have to know who the nation is. It says the nation sins. Who's the nation? All the Jews in the world. There's 14 million Jews in the world. How many? So you have to know the majority, 51% of them. He says, no. The Gemara says, and this is Horayot, page 3a, as you see, you take into consideration if the majority of the inhabitants of Israel acted accordingly, did that sin. Where do they learn it out from? For Shlomo held a feast at that time. When he built the temple, Shlomo celebrated for 14 days. The verse in Malachim, Kings 1, chapter 8, verse 65. For it says, Shlomo made a feast at that time, and all of Israel was with him. The whole nation celebrated with him. A great congregation, a big kahal. From the entrance of Hamat, right, the northern border, there's Syria, whatever, till the brook of Egypt, right, the Nile, whatever it may be, Nachal Mitzrayim.
It was over Yom Kippur, right?
Right. 4 days, 7 days, it says, or he goes on, 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days, including, it was a Sukkot, whatever. They feasted, on Yom Kippur, the celebration of the building of the temple. The rabbis discussed that. How can they celebrate it with such a great simcha that it was, even Yom Kippur was not observed. No, they celebrated on Yom Kippur. The Gemara on Moed Katan, page 9. The Gemara goes on to say, now consider it. It is written that all of Israel was with him, a great congregation. So we defined who the nation of Israel was. In other words, all of that Israel was with him. What need was therefore from the entrance of Hamat to the brook of Edom? Why do you have to define the borders? To designate exactly, you said all of Israel is with him. No, you have to say from the north border to the southern border. You already said the whole nation is with him. Shema Mina, we learned from this, the Gemara says, that only those are called Kahal. Only those are included in the definition of the nation. In Hebrew, in the original, so to speak. Hani Hudika, those are called the nation. Aval Hanach, the ones outside those borders, are not considered the nation. Again, the Jewish people. But here we need a halachic definition. Who is the nation? To know the majority of which, if they made this errant sin, we have to know to bring a par halem davar, this one sacrifice. Because if not the majority, then each one has to bring. Let's say if 100,000 Jews did this sin, and there's 500,000 Jews in Israel, then 100,000 Jews have to bring this korban chatat, their sin offering. But if they're out of 500,000, let's say, if there's 250,001, the majority of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael made that sin, then one offering is offered. This par halam devar, this unique sacrifice of the cow of the hidden matter, the hidden from the courts, that didn't know the right legislation. So that, here we have a halachic definition of the Jewish people for this certain, again, sacrifice, that we have to know who the majority of the Jewish people are. That is defined by the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. If you want to pass these out, the continuation. And the halacha, you have it on, where do you have it? On the right, the Rambam. Right, Maimonides in his book of the laws of Korbanot in Hilchot Shkagot, chapter 13, he says, if the, where it's underlined, Asu rov anshe Eretz Yisrael, if the majority, you have it in English, so maybe we'll read the English. If the majority of the people of the land of Israel, not the Jews in the world, we have to know who the nation, if the majority of the nation, the Rabbi said, the Torah says, but yes, who is the nation? The people of the land of Israel. If they acted on the authority of the court, even if they who acted were but a single tribe, here there's two types of majorities, the Rambam says. Either they're a single tribe, or if the majority of the tribes were so acted. In other words, there could be a numerical majority. That is, that out of, again, 1 million Jews of Israel, so to speak, then 500,001, even if they're from one tribe. Or the numerical majority, or a tribal majority, that is, if there's 7 out of the 12 tribes made this decision, even if they're not the majority, number-wise. You have 7 small tribes. They're not the majority of the population. So that, the Rambam says, either types of majority, either the majority of the tribes or the majority of the nation, even if there's whatever, the courts are liable. In other words, the court brings the one sacrifice, and they who acted on their authority are exempt. Thus, he gives an example. If the inhabitants of the land of Israel were 600,001, and they who acted in accordance with the ruling of the court, right? They went by the court said it's allowed, and later it turned out that they made a mistake. There is such a thing, rabbis can make a mistake. And they who acted in accordance with the ruling of the court were 301,000, which is a majority, and they were all members of the tribe of Yehudah, so it's only one tribe, but they're what I call that a numerical majority, right? We usually call a majority of the population, or what I call the tribal majority. If those who acted were all the members of 7 tribes, even though there are only 100,000 men, which isn't the majority, in spite of that, the court brings the sacrifice of par halam davar. And the Rambam goes on and summarizes, in Hebrew it's stronger, but no regard is paid to those who dwell outside the land. In other words, you don't take into account the numbers of millions of Jews outside the land. There's 12 million Jews outside the land and 600,000 in Israel. The majority is 6 million, right? No. The majority of those in Eretz Yisrael. Why? No regard is paid to those who dwell outside the land, since only the inhabitants of the land of Israel are called a congregation. That's the nation. What you have at the bottom is, again, a summary, the commentary, so to speak, on the Rambam there, but he just says summarize what we said, that you don't take into consideration only the what outside the land of Israel, only those in Eretz Yisrael. They're called the majority, and he brings the Gemara and Horayot. The Rambam, in another place, You might think that's only regarding sacrifices. Obviously, regarding sacrifices, you can't do sacrifices in America, so you don't take into consideration the Jews outside of Israel. Only the ones in Eretz Israel or Yerushalayim were sacrifices. But no, look at the Rambam in the upper left corner. It's small print, Rashi's print. This is from the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah in Tractate Bechorot, Dalet Gimel. In other words, chapter 4. I think it's cut off from you. Chapter 4, Mishnah 3. Here it's talking about the re-establishment of the Sanhedrin. How can we re-establish? How will it be? We're going to come back to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court. We pray for it every day, right? We pray for that returning. That's one of the institutions we mentioned of the Jewish people, of the national body, of having this rabbinic court, the Sanhedrin, that unifies the nation with its decisions, etc. How do we come back to that? It's been disbanded a long time, over 1,000 years ago. So the Rambam says, where it's underlined, that I already explained to you in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, that it's not called a Beit Din, b'shem muchlat, a real Beit Din, the real rabbinic court. We have courts today, we have rabbis and smicha and ordination, but the real smicha that was passed on, who was the first one that received smicha? Yeshua received from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? He put his hand, and then it has to be passed on from teacher to student. It's not just rabbinic attesting, you get a test, you become a rabbi, you scholarship, whatever, wisdom. We have rabbis since then. But what was expanded, this chain of from teacher to student, the ordained student, rabbi, to ordained student, this is a passing on. We'll get to this when we talk about the Sanhedrin, B'ezrat Hashem. The sources, that it's a passing on of not just, again, information, or a test of information. It's literally this divine, let's call it, the rabbis call it a level of prophecy, of divine assistance. It's not a matter of scholarship. Like I said, you can know a lot. But here, this passing on, this chain, this continuation of this metaphysical vehicle, of channel of connection to Hashem, to the divine wisdom. And that was broken. We have time, we don't have time to discuss it. In the year 4118, the rabbis talk about it in Gemara, how this rabbi gave his life to continue, like they made a decree that the rabbis couldn't pass on the Sanhedrin, couldn't pass on the smicha, the ordination. And he gave his life to ordain a few rabbis, and then it continued. But then ultimately, over 1600 years ago, this chain was broken, so to speak. So the Rambam, how will it be returned? So he says, we're not called a real Beit Din with the absolute name, rather a samuch in Eretz Yisrael. You have to be ordained in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara on Sanhedrin, page 13, 14. Again, the conditions are the rabbi and the student, the giver and the receiver, have to be in Eretz Yisrael, which we'll see connected to the thing of prophecy. Prophecy only in the land of Israel, as it says in Moed Katan 25 and other sources, that this prophecy, the connection to the beyond, as over and over again, these different expressions of the same idea, that this conduit that God created in the world that connects to the beyond, to Hashem, is Eretz Yisrael, a geographic location that enables this bridge to connect to Him. Not that God is only in Eretz Yisrael, we mentioned over and over again, but our ability to connect, our three worlds, the world that we live in, of the physical and the fractured, how we can connect to that which is beyond the physical, space and beyond space. That God created a bridge that He enables this. We mentioned over and over again. Vayirad Hashem al Har Sinai, God came down on Sinai. Sinai, we said, is gematria, the word sulam, samach lamed mem, 130. That God lowered the ladder that He created and prescribed that this is the way to connect to me, to the values of above this world. I created a land, just like I said, in characteristics of two pieces of metal. What's the difference? A rusty piece of metal, a fancy piece of plastic, it's nicer, plastic should be more, but it doesn't conduct. There's divinely, objectively created attributes that enable this conductivity. God created, there's a place on earth that enables this conductivity of godliness. And so too, we'll see it's prophecy, but so too this level of the smicha has to be given through, the two have to be in Eretz Yisrael. If the rabbis say, what about the students in across the border, and the rabbis say, or vice versa? No, it doesn't go. It has to be this two pieces of metal. It has to be the rabbi in Eretz Yisrael and the student, and then you have this continuation of the flow. And we'll talk about that. We have a whole topic of the Sanhedrin. But the Rambam says here, so it has to be the samuch in Eretz Yisrael. Either, so we don't have that anymore. So that's it, we're finished. There's no Sanhedrin, God forbid. He says, no, either samuch mipi samuch, either he, a receiver from the, how do you say, ordained from an ordained, and this unbroken chain, or hiskimu b'nei Eretz Yisrael, that all the people of Eretz Yisrael agree to one chacham, this one rabbi. It's hard to read, mine is way down. He will be now the head of the yeshiva. Why? In other words, all of the people of Eretz Yisrael can now appoint one person, if they agree on one person, and we'll have to explain how this works. They appoint one person. Why? But why is it that Jews in Eretz Yisrael have this ability to refocus or re-energize or let's see how, again, rejuvenate this chain? Look what the Rambam writes. Lefisha b'nei Eretz Yisrael hem hanikre, because the Jews in Israel, they are called the nation. They are called the Kahal, that we saw in, right, Horayot page 3, or the Malachim Aleph, that the Torah calls them. The Bible says that the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, they are called the Kahal. That's why it delineated those borders. These are the Kahal. V'kadosh Baruch Hu kara otam kol hakahal. And God called them the whole nation. This is the whole nation. The Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that's the whole nation. Outside, what do you have? What did Yechezkel call them? Yechezkel 37. The dry bones, the scattered bones. But the nation, they're Jews, they're good Jews, holy Jews, rabbis. The rabbis in the Talmud Bavli wrote this, right? In Horayot, this is in the Talmud Bavli. It's not some derogatory term, diminishing their value. But they're disconnected from that idyllic connection, direct connection. We'll see strong words of the rabbis if we get to it soon. I don't want to mention it now, but very strong words of the rabbis of the significance of this outside the land of Israel. But this is the nation. And God called them the whole nation. What the Rambam adds. Vafilu hayu asara anashim. What does that mean? Even if they're only 10 Jews. 10 Jews, that's the whole nation. These 10 are keeping this umbilical cord, keeping the world alive. And we'll see what the Rabbi, so much more, of what it means. But these 10 Jews, that's the whole nation. And from that, now there's life to all the Jews in the world and all the world. Without those Jews, as we'll see, as if, God forbid, there's no connection of the divine to this world. And that's why we'll see that it can't be, that there always have to be Jews here. But the Rambam says they're called the nation, and God called them the whole nation. And even if they be only 10 Jews, ein mashkichim lezulatam b'chutz la'aretz. You don't take into consideration all those Jews outside the land. There's millions outside the land. They're not called the nation. And here it's not talking about sacrifices. This is a law of, we now have to know who the nation is. Again, how does it work? Just quickly, I'll give you a metaphor. There's different, what's it called? Forms of H2O, of water. Right? You have, when it's frozen, you have ice. What's it called? Not stages. Forms?
Stages of matter.
Stages of matter? I don't know if stages. Not
There's 4 stages of matter. Well, actually 5.
forms of, whatever. You have ice, and then it melts, it gets hotter, and you have water, and then it gets even hotter, and you have
Water vapor.
gas, right? Steam, gas. Let's call the Sanhedrin this frozen form, that now the Jews have a real, tangible, three-dimensional, energized, these rabbis, these divine energy, encapsulated in the form of these 71 rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, in the Sanhedrin. When it's disbanded, this energy, right, there's a law of conservation of energy. Where does the H2O, where does the energy go? When it gets hot, so to speak, the Jews are in exile, we don't have the Sanhedrin anymore. But that energy is not lost. That energy is now disbanded in a gaseous form, let's call it, among the nation of Israel. Because the Sanhedrin is, like I said, this encapsulated, is like a laser, right? It's a very focused energy. So we have the Sanhedrin, but when it's not there, the energy now dissipates, is scattered among the nation. But the nation, we said, is where? The Jews in Eretz Yisrael. It's not like all the Jews in the world now have this aspect of the H2O, this energy all over the world, this gas. No, the gas, so to speak, this gaseous form, the spiritual, metaphysical form, this energy is now in the nation of Israel, which is the land of Israel. Therefore, they have the ability to refocus, or in this metaphor, to refreeze and come back to the Sanhedrin again. In other words, you have this form of the gas in the H2O in the form of ice, let's say, the Sanhedrin. And then it's disbanded. The energy now dissipates and is scattered. Now, but the ability to refreeze it, to refocus it on one, into the Sanhedrin again. But why the Jews in Eretz Yisrael? Because that is where the energy is. The energy is in the nation of Israel. And the Rambam says that's the whole nation. Why don't you need all the Jews in the world to refocus this energy? They all have a part of this energy. And we need everyone to now agree on one person. No. The Jews in Eretz Yisrael, for they are called, God calls them the whole nation. Even if there be only 10 Jews, they are now the bearers, those that bear and contain that divine content. And now they can refocus it and come